High above the world, on the shining peak of Mount Olympus, thunder still roars as a reminder of absolute power. Zeus, the king of the gods, is remembered as the ruler of the sky, the keeper of cosmic order, and the wielder of the unstoppable thunderbolt. Yet behind the blinding flashes of lightning lies a far darker legacy, one whispered among gods, feared by mortals, and quietly despised across Olympus itself. For Zeus was not only a god of justice, but a god of desire. His countless love affairs, reckless, deceptive, and often cruel, crossed every boundary between gods and mortals. He took many forms to claim what he wanted: a golden rain, a white bull, a soaring eagle, even the shadows of the night itself. Each transformation left behind not romance, but chaos. These forbidden unions gave birth to heroes and monsters alike, but also to curses, vengeance, and endless suffering. Hera's silent fury, the shattered lives of mortals, and the uneasy tension among the Olympians all point to an uncomfortable truth: Zeus' greatest weapon was not lightning, but unchecked power. And so the question lingers like distant thunder in the sky. Was Zeus truly a noble protector of order, or the most dangerous tyrant Olympus ever knew? Part 1. Absolute power and love affairs that defied all laws. Power, when left without restraint, does not merely rule, it consumes. And on Mount Olympus, no power was ever more absolute than that of Zeus. As king of the gods, Zeus was not simply another divine ruler among equals. He was the law itself. The sky obeyed him, storms bent to his will, and even fate seemed hesitant to challenge his authority. His thunderbolt was not just a weapon, it was a reminder that order existed because Zeus allowed it to exist. Yet within this divine order lay a dangerous contradiction. The same God entrusted with justice, balance, and cosmic stability was also the one who broke boundaries most freely, especially when it came to desire. Zeus did not love as mortals love. He did not court, wait, or compromise. His love affairs were declarations of power, not intimacy. To desire was to take, to want was to act, and no law, divine or mortal, was strong enough to deny him. The illusion of consent in a world ruled by thunder. Among the gods and mortals alike, stories of Zeus romances were often romanticized. Ancient poets spoke of passion, fate, and divine attraction. But beneath these poetic retellings lies a more unsettling truth. How does one refuse the ruler of the universe? When Zeus approached a mortal woman, it was never a meeting of equals. His presence alone could bend reality. Fear, awe, and inevitability surrounded him like a storm cloud. To say no to Zeus was not simply rejection. It was defiance against the sky itself. Even among the gods, refusal carried consequences. Nymphs vanished. Goddesses were silenced. Some myths hint, quietly, carefully, that Olympus was filled with unspoken rules. And the most important of them was this: Zeus gets what he wants. In later, darker interpretations of myth, whispered among philosophers and dramatists, Zeus lovers are not remembered for love, but for survival. Transformation as a weapon. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Zeus' affairs was not their number, but their method. Rarely did Zeus appear as himself. Instead, he transformed. A white bull with gentle eyes, a swan drifting silently across moonlit water, a golden rain falling through locked chambers, an eagle descending from the heavens. To ancient storytellers, these transformations were symbols of divine creativity. But to modern eyes, and to the darker voices within mythology, they resemble something else entirely: deception. Zeus did not change form to be playful. He changed form to bypass resistance. Locked doors meant nothing to a god who could become rain. Guardians were irrelevant to a god who could fly. Social boundaries, moral laws, and even divine vows collapsed under the weight of infinite power paired with limitless imagination. In some imagined versions of Olympus, those rarely written but often implied, Other gods watched these transformations with discomfort. For if Zeus could become anything to get what he wanted, what safety truly existed beneath his rule? Gods, mortals, and the collapse of boundaries. Zeus lovers came from every corner of existence. Goddesses like Demeter and Leto, titans like Mnemosyne, nymphs bound to forests and rivers, mortal queens, and princesses with no divine protection. This was not love crossing boundaries. It was love erasing them entirely. Olympus, once meant to stand above mortal chaos, became deeply entangled in it. Mortal blood flowed through divine veins. Divine grudges poisoned human lives. Entire cities rose or fell because Zeus desired one woman for one night. And with every union came consequences. Children born of Zeus were rarely allowed peace. They were marked from birth, either as future heroes burdened by impossible expectations, or as threats to the divine order Hera sought desperately to protect. In fictional expansions of myth, it is said that some mortals prayed not for Zeus' attention, but for his indifference. For to be noticed by the king of gods was often the beginning of tragedy. Olympus watches and says nothing. One of the most unsettling questions surrounding Zeus' reign is not what he did, but why no one stopped him. Poseidon ruled the seas. Hades governed the dead. Athena embodied wisdom. Apollo represented prophecy and truth. And yet, none openly challenged Zeus' behavior. Why? Because Olympus was not a democracy. It was a hierarchy enforced by fear. Zeus had overthrown his own father, Cronus, in a brutal war that shattered generations of titans. Every god knew the lesson etched into history. Even blood ties meant nothing when power was threatened. To oppose Zeus was to risk exile, punishment, or obliteration. So the gods remained silent. They watched as Zeus' desires reshaped destinies, knowing that resistance would only bring thunder. In darker retellings, Olympus is less a family of gods and more a court of uneasy subjects, bound by loyalty, fear, and resignation. Hera, the silent witness. No discussion of Zeus' unchecked love affairs can exist without Hera, his wife, his queen, and his most enduring victim. Hera knew. She always knew. Each affair was another public humiliation, another crack in the illusion of divine marriage. Yet Hera's rage was never truly directed at Zeus, not because she lacked the will, but because she lacked the power. To challenge Zeus directly was to challenge the structure of Olympus itself. So Hera endured and waited. Her vengeance, slow and merciless, would later define entire myth cycles. But in this early stage, during the height of Zeus' indulgence, Hera's silence became part of the system that allowed his behavior to continue. In some fictional interpretations, Hera is portrayed not as merely jealous, but as tragically trapped, forced to uphold the image of divine order while suffering beneath it. Love as dominion. What Zeus practiced was not romance. It was dominion disguised as affection. Each conquest reaffirmed his supremacy. Each lover was proof that no boundary could contain him. Not land, not sky, not morality itself. Zeus did not fear consequences because consequences were for lesser beings. He judged others while standing above judgment. And in doing so, he unknowingly planted the seeds of resentment that would one day stain his legacy. Among mortals, Zeus became a god to fear rather than love. Among gods, a ruler to obey rather than respect. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Olympus began to rot from within. The first cracks in the divine image. Though Zeus remained unchallenged in power, his reputation quietly eroded. Heroes born of his affairs questioned their origins. Gods whispered behind golden halls. Mortals rewrote prayers with trembling voices. In some imagined versions of myth, even the fates paused their threads when Zeus passed, not out of reverence, but caution, because absolute power does not merely corrupt, it isolates. And Zeus, surrounded by lovers, children, and followers, stood increasingly alone. This was only the beginning. For every unchecked desire leaves a debt unpaid. And Olympus, though silent for now, would one day demand its price. Part 2. Hera, the wrath and the price of betrayal. If Zeus ruled Olympus through thunder, then Hera ruled it through memory. She remembered every promise ever broken, every vow spoken beneath sacred skies and later betrayed in silence. Every whisper that reached her ears from mortals too afraid to speak Zeus' name aloud. Hera was not born cruel. She became cruel, and Olympus helped forge her that way, the queen who could not leave. Hera was the queen of the gods, the goddess of marriage, fidelity, and sacred union. To mortals, she was invoked at weddings, prayed to by wives, and feared by lovers who strayed too far from their vows. Ironically, she was bound eternally to the one God who shattered every vow he ever made. In a divine hierarchy where power was absolute, Hera's position was both exalted and imprisoned. She wore a crown that could not protect her. She shared a throne she could not escape. To leave Zeus was unthinkable, not because of love, but because of symbolism. Hera was marriage itself. If she abandoned Zeus, the very concept she embodied would collapse. Olympus demanded that she endure, smile, and remain silent. And so she stayed. Each betrayal was public. Each affair echoed across realms. Gods knew. Mortals knew. Even the winds carried rumors of Zeus' latest conquest. Yet Zeus never hid his infidelity. He had no reason to. Power does not apologize. The slow birth of divine wrath. Hera's rage did not erupt overnight. It fermented. At first, there was denial, then humiliation, then grief, and finally, something colder, calculated, precise, merciless. She could not strike Zeus directly. To do so would mean civil war among the gods, a war Olympus could not survive. The last time divine blood was spilled on that scale, the universe nearly tore itself apart. So Hera redirected her fury. She punished the echoes of Zeus' desire, the women he loved, the children he abandoned, the bloodlines that reminded her daily of her powerlessness. To many storytellers, this is where Hera becomes the villain. But to understand her wrath, one must understand her cage. The other women, scapegoats of Olympus. The mortal women Zeus pursued rarely sought him. They were chosen, marked, and forever changed. Some prayed for protection. Some were deceived by beauty or kindness. Some were simply unlucky enough to be noticed. Hera knew this, and yet she punished them anyway. Why? Because Olympus demanded an outlet for injustice. And Hera, denied justice herself, became its cruel substitute. In darker interpretations of myth, Hera is aware of the injustice of her actions and despises herself for it. But self-awareness does not soften pain, it sharpens it. Each punishment was a message, not to the victim, but to Zeus. Look what you forced me to become. Io, the cow who carried a curse. Io's story is often told as a tragic romance. But through Hera's eyes, it was a public insult. Zeus turned Io into a white cow to hide her. Hera, knowing the deception instantly, demanded the cow as a gift. Zeus, unable to refuse without revealing his lie, complied. Hera chained Io's suffering into eternity. 100-eyed guardian, a relentless gadfly, endless wandering. To Zeus, it was another affair gone wrong. To Hera, it was proof that Zeus would rather transform reality than confront her pain. In some fictional retellings, Hera visits Io in secret, not to comfort her, but to witness the cost of Zeus' lies firsthand. Not out of cruelty, but to remind herself that silence has consequences. Leto, pregnancy under persecution. Leto's crime was simple. She carried Zeus' children. Hera forbade the earth itself from offering her shelter. No land, no island, no safe place to give birth. This was not jealousy, it was warfare. By turning the world against Leto, Hera demonstrated her reach. She could not dethrone Zeus, but she could make the universe uninhabitable for those who bore his legacy. When Apollo and Artemis were finally born, their first breath was taken in exile. And Hera watched, not with satisfaction, but with resolve. Because every child Zeus fathered was another reminder that Olympus was built on betrayal. The children inherited punishment. Perhaps Hera's most controversial actions were directed not at Zeus' lovers, but at his children. Heracles, Dionysus, countless unnamed demigods. These children did not choose their father, yet they paid the highest price. Heracles was driven mad. Dionysus was hunted. Others were cursed before they could speak. Why punish the innocent? Because innocence meant nothing in a system where power was inherited without accountability. In some darker mythic expansions, Hera does not hate the children themselves. She hates what they represent, living proof that Zeus could break sacred vows without consequence. Every demigod was a crack in the illusion of divine order, and Hera's cruelty was her attempt to seal those cracks with blood. Hera and the gods who looked away. What made Hera's wrath truly terrifying was not its violence, but its silence. Other gods watched. Athena, wise but cautious. Apollo, prophetic but detached. Even Hestia, goddess of hearth and peace, withdrew rather than intervene. Why did none stop Hera? Because doing so would require confronting Zeus, and no one was willing to pay that price. In some imagined versions of Olympus, the gods privately sympathized with Hera. They understood her suffering. They even feared Zeus' behavior. But sympathy without action is complicity. And Olympus, drenched in gold and lightning, became morally bankrupt. The tragic irony of the goddess of marriage. Hera's greatest cruelty is also her greatest tragedy. She became the very thing she despised. She upheld marriage while destroying families. She punished infidelity while trapped in it. She enforced loyalty while receiving none. Her identity collapsed inward, twisting into wrath. In some philosophical retellings, Hera is not a villain, but a warning. A portrait of what happens when sacred ideals are weaponized by power structures that refuse accountability. Marriage, fidelity, justice, none of these survive when only one side must obey. The price Zeus never paid. Throughout all of this, Zeus remained untouched. He lost no power, no throne, no authority. Hera paid the emotional price. Mortals paid the physical price. Children paid the generational price. Zeus paid nothing, and that, more than any curse, is what turned Hera's rage into legend. In some speculative myths, the fates themselves questioned this imbalance. Threads tangled, destinies warped, because even cosmic order cannot survive injustice forever. Wrath as survival. Hera's anger was not born of jealousy. It was born of survival. In a realm where she could not leave, could not fight, and could not win, wrath became her language. Punishment became her voice. She did not ask Olympus to understand her. She demanded it fear her, and it did. Not because she was cruel, but because cruelty was the only power left to her. The queen who never won. Hera never defeated Zeus. She never escaped him. She never healed. Her story does not end in triumph, but in endurance. She remained queen. She remained wife. She remained goddess. And Olympus continued to pretend that order had been preserved. But beneath the marble halls and thunderous skies, resentment grew. Not just toward Zeus, but toward the system that allowed him to reign unchecked. Hera's wrath was not the end of the story. It was the warning. Because when betrayal goes unpunished, vengeance does not disappear. It spreads. And Olympus, soaked in divine blood and broken vows, was already cracking. Part 3. The Supreme God, Hero, Tyrant, or the most hated ruler of Olympus. Every empire eventually faces the same question. Not how powerful its ruler is, but whether that power was ever deserved. For Olympus, that question has always carried a single name: Zeus, the hero Olympus needed. To understand Zeus fairly, one must begin at the beginning. Not with his affairs, not with his betrayals, but with his rise. Before Zeus, there was chaos. Cronus devoured his children. The Titans ruled through fear. The cosmos itself trembled beneath unchecked brutality. Zeus was the rebel who broke that cycle. He defied his father, liberated his siblings, and led a war so violent that it reshaped reality itself. Mountains were torn apart, seas boiled, time fractured under divine conflict. When the dust settled, Zeus stood victorious, not merely as a conqueror, but as a stabilizer. He divided power among the gods. He established order. He bound chaos beneath Tartarus. To early mortals, Zeus was salvation. He brought rain to dying fields, justice to oath-breakers, lightning to those who defied cosmic law. Without Zeus, Olympus would never have existed. And without Olympus, the world as mortals knew it would have collapsed into darkness. In this sense, Zeus was undeniably a hero. But heroes are not judged only by what they defeat. They are judged by what they become afterward. When order becomes ownership, power won through revolution carries a dangerous temptation, the belief that victory grants entitlement. Zeus did not simply rule Olympus, he owned it. The sky was his domain. Law was his voice. Judgment flowed downward from his will alone. At first, this central authority seemed necessary. The gods were volatile, humanity fragile. Order required a firm hand. But over time, Zeus ceased to be the guardian of balance and became its sole interpreter. What Zeus allowed was just. What Zeus desired became permissible. What Zeus feared was erased. In darker philosophical retellings, this is the moment Zeus stops being a hero and becomes something far more dangerous, a god beyond accountability. The tyrant who never faced consequences. Tyranny is not defined by cruelty alone. It is defined by immunity. Zeus could destroy cities and be praised. He could father wars and be worshipped. He could break every vow he enforced and remain unchallenged. No court judged him. No god sentenced him. No fate openly opposed him. Even when Zeus was wrong, Olympus bent reality to protect his image. Hera suffered. Mortals perished. Children inherited curses. Zeus endured none of it. In fictional expansions of myth, some gods privately questioned whether Zeus still served order, or whether order merely served Zeus. But questioning power is not the same as resisting it. And Olympus, paralyzed by fear and comfort, chose silence. The fear beneath worship. Mortals prayed to Zeus not only for protection, but for mercy. Storms were not just weather, they were moods. Lightning was not natural, it was personal. Zeus was unpredictable, and unpredictability breeds fear. Cities built temples not out of devotion, but insurance. Sacrifices were offered not with love, but desperation. In some darker, mythological interpretations, Zeus' worship resembles appeasement more than faith. He was revered not because he was good, but because he was unavoidable. That is the hallmark of a tyrant. The gods who followed, not believed. Olympus appeared unified, but unity does not imply loyalty. Poseidon resented Zeus' authority. Hades accepted exile rather than rule beneath him. Athena obeyed, but never fully trusted. Even Apollo, god of truth, rarely spoke prophecy that directly condemned Zeus. Why? Because truth without power is suicide. In imagined dialogues between the gods, Zeus is less a father figure and more an inevitability, like gravity or death. To resist him would not be noble. It would be futile. And so the gods complied, not because Zeus was right, but because Zeus was permanent. Heroism without humanity. What ultimately separates Zeus from traditional heroes is not his strength, but his detachment. Heroes suffer consequences. Heroes change. Heroes learn. Zeus did none of these things. He remained constant while the world bent around him. When mortals died because of his decisions, they were collateral. When gods suffered because of his desires, they were expendable. Zeus did not evolve. And stagnation, when paired with absolute power, becomes decay. The necessary evil argument. Some philosophers of myth argue that Zeus was a necessary evil, that the universe required a singular will, that chaos demanded domination, that freedom under Zeus was preferable to annihilation under the Titans. Perhaps they are right, but necessity does not equal virtue. A storm may be necessary for rain, but it still destroys. Zeus maintained order, but at the cost of compassion. Stability, but at the expense of justice. Peace enforced by fear. The question, then, is not whether Zeus was effective. It is whether effectiveness absolves moral failure. Olympus as a reflection of Zeus. A ruler shapes their kingdom. Olympus was magnificent and rotten. Golden halls concealed resentment. Divine feasts masked bitterness. Immortality prolonged suffering rather than healing it. This was Zeus' legacy, not harmony, but endurance. Not justice, but silence. In this sense, Olympus did not collapse, but it stagnated. And stagnation is simply decay that has learned to hide. The judgment Zeus never faced. In many imagined endings to the myth, Zeus is never overthrown. Not because he was perfect, but because the system he built made resistance impossible. This is perhaps the darkest truth of all. Zeus was not hated because he was cruel. He was hated because he was untouchable. Hate grows when injustice has no outlet. And Olympus had no court above Zeus. Hero or tyrant? The wrong question. Perhaps the question itself is flawed. Zeus was not simply a hero. He was not merely a tyrant. He was something more unsettling. A ruler who began as a savior and ended as a symbol of everything he once destroyed. He overthrew a tyrant, only to become immune to judgment himself. The final verdict. Zeus will forever be remembered as the god who shaped the world. But shaping the world does not grant ownership of its suffering. In the end, Zeus is not hated because he failed. He is hated because he succeeded and never had to answer for cost. And that, more than any thunderbolt or war, is why the king of the gods remains the most controversial figure Olympus ever crowned. In the end, Zeus remains a paradox carved into the heart of Olympus. He was the god who saved the cosmos from devouring chaos, yet also the ruler who allowed suffering to flourish beneath his reign. He established order but never learned restraint. He demanded justice, while standing forever beyond judgment. And through this contradiction, Zeus became something more troubling than a simple villain. He became untouchable. The hatred surrounding Zeus was never born from weakness or failure. It grew precisely because he succeeded, because he ruled too well, too absolutely, and for too long without consequence. Mortals feared him, gods obeyed him, but neither truly loved him. Olympus did not fall under Zeus. It endured. And endurance, when fueled by silence and fear, is not harmony. It is decay slowed by immortality. So was Zeus a hero or a tyrant? Perhaps he was both. Or perhaps he was the warning hidden inside myth itself. That absolute power, even when born from noble intentions, will always demand a price. And if no one is allowed to question the ruler, that price will be paid by everyone else. Zeus may have ruled the sky, but his legacy still thunders with unanswered judgment.
The end of Greek mythology. Greek mythology did not die when its gods fell. It died when we stopped being afraid of them. Part 1. When the gods stopped screaming. The slow death of the sacred. Greek mythology did not end with thunder. It ended with silence. No single sword struck Zeus from Olympus. No divine war erased Athena's wisdom or Apollo's light. Instead, the gods faded the way stars disappear at dawn, not because they are gone, but because something brighter convinces us to stop looking. To speak of the end of Greek mythology is not to describe an extinction event. It is to describe a psychological rupture, the moment when myth ceased to function as truth and became decoration. 1. Myth as a living system, not a storybook. To understand how Greek mythology ended, we must first understand what it was. Greek mythology was not literature. It was not metaphor. It was not entertainment. It was a total operating system for reality. When a storm destroyed a fleet, it was not weather. It was Poseidon's mood. When crops failed, it was not climate. It was Demeter's grief. When madness struck a king, it was not illness. It was Dionysus knocking too loudly on the soul. Mythology explained why suffering exists, why power corrupts, why beauty destroys, why fate laughs at human plans. The gods were not moral teachers. They were mirrors of the universe's indifference. And that is precisely why they became unbearable. 2. The first crack. Philosophy replaces. Fear the end began quietly, with questions. Thales asked what the world was made of. Anaximander suggested forces instead of gods. Heraclitus replaced divine will with logos, order without personality. Plato did something even more dangerous. He domesticated myth. In Plato's Republic, myths are allowed only if they teach obedience. Gods must be morally perfect. Chaos must be censored. The divine must behave. This was the first act of violence against Greek mythology, because Greek gods were never meant to be good. They were meant to be true. Zeus raped. Hera tortured. Athena punished pride. Apollo spread plague. These were not flaws. They were honest reflections of power itself. Once philosophy demanded reason, myth became suspect. Once reason demanded consistency, gods became embarrassing. Once embarrassment replaced terror, the gods were already dying. 3. Rationality as a weapon. By the Hellenistic period, myth survived, but only as symbolism. The Stoics said myths were metaphors for natural laws. The Epicureans said gods existed but did not care. The skeptics laughed. This reinterpretation did not destroy myth immediately. It hollowed it out. A god explained as metaphor is no longer feared. A god explained as allegory cannot punish you. And a god who cannot punish is no longer a god. Greek mythology depended on existential vulnerability. You were small. The universe was alive, and it could notice you at any moment. Rationality offered something seductive. Safety. The price was transcendence. 4. Rome. The gods become bureaucrats. Rome did not kill Greek mythology. It nationalized it. Greek gods were absorbed, renamed, reorganized, and repurposed as state instruments. Zeus became Jupiter, less wild, more administrative. Ares became Mars, less chaotic, more patriotic. Aphrodite became Venus, less dangerous, more idealized. Roman religion demanded order, hierarchy, usefulness. The gods were no longer terrifying forces of cosmic imbalance. They were civil servants of empire. This was myth's second death. Loss of unpredictability. 5. Christianity. The final blow. Christianity did not merely replace Greek mythology. It reframed the universe. Instead of many gods representing conflicting forces, there was one God claiming absolute moral authority. Instead of tragic fate, there was salvation. Instead of cyclical time, there was linear history. Instead of heroic defiance, there was obedience. Greek mythology could coexist with reason. It could survive reinterpretation, but it could not survive moral absolutism. Greek gods were immoral by design. Christian theology required moral perfection. Thus, Greek mythology was recoded as pagan, primitive, demonic, childish, not dangerous. Not true, just wrong. Once myth becomes wrong instead of terrifying, it is finished. And yet, this was not the end. It was only the end of belief. Part 2. When myth became a ghost, the afterlife of Greek mythology. Greek mythology did not vanish. It went underground. When belief dies, obsession often begins. 1. From faith to fascination. In medieval Europe, Greek mythology survived in fragments, dangerous, censored, whispered. By the Renaissance, it returned with a new mask. Art. Michelangelo's bodies were pagan. Botticelli's Venus rose again from the sea. Shakespeare borrowed mythic structures without naming the gods. The gods returned, but as aesthetic objects. This was resurrection without divinity. They were admired, not obeyed, studied, not feared, painted, not prayed to, and something strange happened. The more society claimed the gods were dead, the more they appeared in dreams, art, and literature. 2. Psychology. The gods move inside the mind. Freud did something revolutionary. He turned Greek mythology inward. Oedipus was no longer a cursed king. He became a universal psychological structure. Narcissus was no longer punished by the gods. He became a diagnosis. Carl Jung went further. He declared the gods were archetypes, eternal patterns in the collective unconscious. This was both brilliant and tragic, because while it preserved the gods, it also imprisoned them. A god reduced to psychology can no longer strike lightning. A god explained is a god disarmed. And yet, modern humans began experiencing something paradoxical. They no longer believed in gods, but they lived as if ruled by them. Obsession with power, Zeus. Addiction to beauty, Aphrodite. Fear of aging, Kronos. Madness of excess, Dionysus. The gods had not left. They had simply stopped asking permission. 3. Myth without ritual, a dangerous vacuum. Ancient Greeks had rituals to contain the gods, festivals for Dionysus, temples for Athena, sacrifices for appeasement. Modern society has no containment. We worship success without Hermes, beauty without Aphrodite's warnings, war without Ares' shame, technology without Prometheus's punishment. This is why modern crises feel mythic. Economic collapse feels like divine wrath. Climate change feels like Gaia's revenge. Artificial intelligence feels like forbidden fire. We are living in mythic consequences, without mythic language. And that is far more dangerous. 4. Cinema. The gods rebranded as spectacle Hollywood, resurrected Greek mythology again, but stripped of its terror. Gods became superheroes. Tragedy became entertainment. Fate became a plot twist. In ancient myth, heroes do not win. They endure. In modern adaptations, heroes triumph. They control destiny. This is not Greek mythology. It is its domesticated corpse. A mythology without inevitability is propaganda. 5. The illusion of progress. Modern humans believe they are beyond myth. But when stock markets crash, people look for scapegoats. When pandemics strike, people seek meaning. When empires fall, people narrate destiny. Myth did not end. Myth was denied, and denial made it unconscious. And unconscious myths are the most dangerous of all. Part 3. The Real End, or When Myth Returns as Judgment. Greek mythology will truly end only under one condition: when humanity no longer needs meaning. And that has never happened. 1. The return of fate. Despite all our technology, we are still haunted by fate. Algorithms predict us. Genetics limit us. Climate ignores us. We have rebuilt the Moirai with data. We have rebuilt Kronos with time pressure. We have rebuilt Nemesis with collapse. The names changed. The structure did not. This is why Greek mythology feels strangely modern, because it never promised justice, only consequence. 2. Why Greek mythology is unkillable. Greek mythology does not offer comfort. It offers clarity. It says, power corrupts gods and humans equally. Beauty destroys those who worship it blindly. Knowledge has a price. Fate laughs last. These truths are uncomfortable. That is why civilizations try to bury them. But every time society collapses, Greek mythology returns, not as religion, but as diagnosis. 3. The final paradox. Greek mythology did not end because it was false. It ended because it was too honest. Modern narratives promise control. Greek myth promised limits. Modern ideology promises salvation. Greek myth promised tragedy. And yet, here we are, surrounded by godlike technologies, terrified of forces we created, naming disasters as if they were alive. The gods are gone, but their shadows are everywhere. 4. What the end really means. The end of Greek mythology is not a historical event, it is a choice to see the universe as manageable, a choice to deny tragedy, a choice to believe we are smarter than fate. History suggests this choice never lasts, because when certainty collapses, when systems fail, when meaning fractures, humans do what they have always done. They tell myths again. Greek mythology ends only when humanity dares to believe it has finally escaped the gods. And that moment, as every myth warns us, is precisely when the gods return.